G'day, I'm Martyn and this is The Truth of It, and today I'm bringing you something of a US election special. Just when you were starting to get sick of it, hang in there with me. I'm going to bring you some realities of the US election, some encouragement from the US election, and finally I will go through a little bit of a defense of Donald Trump's legacy and explain why it is that I ended up becoming a Trump supporter. First up, the US election. Where are we up to? And I want to give this some solid coverage of really where everything is and what it all means as best that I can in the time that we have. But first of all, this is where we are. It looks like there's going to be recounts in Arizona, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin and Georgia because Biden and Trump are within 1% of each other in those states. There may be others as well, depending how the processes work out. Are they going to change the results? Probably not, to be honest, because the differences in votes are too great. Recounts don't usually make that big of a difference. Mail-in ballots could change that, we'll see, but they'll probably stay roughly as they are. Second, there is an arsenal of lawsuits coming down the pipeline from the Trump campaign. The outcomes of those may change a thing or two, and I'm going to analyse those in just a second. But first I want to make some general notes about the election. It's important to note that it was not the Trump wipeout that it was supposed to be. It was not the carnage that was predicted by the polls and hoped for by the media, and really hoped for by the media, I think. Trump actually attracted 7 million more votes than he did in 2016, despite the onslaught against him, which I think is quite incredible. Of course, the trouble was that Biden attracted 9 million more votes than Hillary Clinton did in 2016, and so Biden ultimately looks to win at this stage. But Republicans look set to keep control of the Senate, and so any Biden government will be severely limited because the Senate, if they do keep control, which they seem to be, will be controlled by them with a strong leader in Mitch McConnell, limiting Biden's power and the Democrats' power. But they also unexpectedly not only didn't lose a single seat in the House, but they made significant gains in the House, and they picked up the governorship of Montana. There were some gubernatorial elections at the same time. The election may ultimately come down to just roughly 80,000 or so votes in 2 or 3 key swing states. It was an utter defiance of the polls and of the media. But right now, this is where we are. There's allegations of fraud abounding, there's lots of people that are suspicious, and there's lawsuits that are flying in every which way. And I want to talk for a minute about the suspicions, because I think there's a lot of people, especially in Australia, who just don't understand the suspicions and think it's crazy. We live in modern Western countries, this sort of thing doesn't happen, it's all conspiratorial. Well, all right, let me run through a little bit of that, some perceptions around that. But secondly, I actually want to go through the lawsuits themselves and just see what they say before making some concluding comments. Regarding those suspicions, think of it from the point of view perhaps of what Trump supporters or some Trump supporters who are politically engaged saw and heard and experienced. The polls were against you, as they were in 2016. You probably suspect the pollsters' motives, as you suspect the media's motives for good reasons, and Silicon Valley's motives for good reasons, and the political establishment's motives for good reasons. You think the pollsters are probably part and parcel of all of that, because they're not just wrong, they're cartoonishly, stupidly wrong, and they said they'd mended their ways after 2016. They hadn't. They were actually, I think, more off this time. So, you know, the polls are against you, but that's okay, because election day is coming. The media's against you, well, that's also okay. They have been for years. You're over it. It's part of life. Election day's coming. In 2016, your side showed that, you know, you could take the fight up because you still had your vote. The feeling on the ground is palpable. Trump yard signs have an incredible density in most of the key swing states. The rallies are massive. Biden's meanwhile got his 12 people in chalk circles and no energy, and it just looks like this huge disparity. And you feel like you know what people are really thinking. You feel like you know where the support is, and we'll do a 2016 over again. Election day comes, and on election night, it looks to you like Trump has done it again. As you consider going to bed late in the evening, this is where the key swing states stand. In Michigan, Trump is up, which Trump was meant to lose by a massive landslide on the mainstream polls. Michigan is up 10.4%. Trump to Biden, 314,000 votes with 60% of precincts reporting. Incredible lead. Wisconsin, you're 4.9% up, Trump is, with 130,000 votes up, 82% of precincts reporting. Pennsylvania, the key swing state of the whole election, was 15.2% up for Trump, or nearly 700,000 votes with 64% of precincts reporting. Georgia, 7.5% up. Again, these are all massive leads, over 300,000 votes with 83% of precincts reporting. This looks to be, on election night, unassailable victory. Now, you've noticed that the media are being very slow to call the red states and being very fast to call the blue states, but you're used to that, and so it looks like probably in the headlines of Electoral College numbers that Biden's ahead, but actually on the map and looking at it, it looked very much like Trump had done it again. And you go to bed. But of course, in the night, Biden comes out and he says, well, we're on track to win this tonight. And everybody goes, that's a bold claim. And then Trump comes out in the night and he says, this is fraud. The counting has stopped. And there was much commentary made on the night, by the way, by the various networks that were covering this. I was watching more than one and following it closely about the fact that counting had slowed or stopped, and they were trying to figure out why that would be. Trump comes out as if he's a man who smelled a rat. And he said, why has it stopped? They better not find, he says, a swag of extra blue votes or piles of extra blue votes at 4 o'clock in the morning. Well, the average Trump supporter wakes up in the morning and, wow, it looks like some bags of votes were found at 4 o'clock in the morning. There was quite a spectacular turnaround in these states at about that time, or, early in the morning. And these states that had such unassailable Trump leads all of a sudden are either evened out or Biden is slightly ahead. What was unassailably red is now blue, and it's coming out of a few key Democrat cities, only in a few key swing states, only it seems. And there's an avalanche of reports of voter fraud, pictures, videos, lawsuits, graphs, experts, the whole lot, and it seems that every instance of fraud that's been seen is in favour of Biden at Trump's expense, and social media is going nuts, censoring everyone who's trying to talk about it, including the president himself. Now, how do you think they feel? The powerful narrative for that person is what they saw with their own eyes, what they experienced over the election period, and they're not going to shake that easily. Something to them seems off, and they are unsettled about it. And here's the thing, these allegations of voter fraud have come forward, and they've moved from allegations now to people prepared to sign sworn affidavits in huge numbers, making very grave allegations, which I'm going to get to. And there seems to be a lot of corroborating evidence. And here's the reality. The question, therefore, needs to be answered. Even if there's nothing to see, it needs to be answered. Because if you have a significant portion of the population who feel as though they've been cheated, who already feel as though nobody's on their side in the establishment and in the systems, and now they can't even have their vote heard, that is going to be cancer in society. It's going to gnaw away very severely. And the mentality of many is just to mock these people, to sideline them, to say, what a load of rubbish, and to not regard their concerns. That isn't going to go so well long term. Now, there is a perfectly innocent explanation for what happened that could be correct. That is that in-person votes favour Trump, postal ballots overwhelmingly favour Biden. That might be correct. It's a little unusual because America is not the only country in the world to have postal voting, although America, I think it was the first time this time around. But I mean, for example, here in Australia, we've had postal voting a long time. I always do a postal ballot because I'm not on the electoral roll, and so do postal vote. But there's never a case where you've got Anthony Green on the ABC going, oh yeah, but we've got to wait for the postal ballots to come because they're going to be completely different. They're not completely different because they're from the same constituency. It's not like the postal votes all came from Manhattan and the walk-ins all came from Oklahoma. It doesn't work that way. And so there is that kind of, but there's a possibility. Maybe it's just really different in America. Maybe the Trump campaign saying postal votes aren't ideal had a huge impact. Maybe. It is a statistically improbable thing, but maybe. Also, fraud on this scale really does seem unlikely, and I agree with this. It seems exceedingly difficult to pull off. There's always going to be some small-scale fraud, but to pull it off at this level is pretty tough and pretty bold, let's put it that way. Unless you have evidence. If you're going to make these claims, you've got to prove them, and that's the point of the system, right? If you've got proof, come forward, we'll look at it. Unless you live in a tyranny, unless you live in a dictatorship, then the evidence for things that have gone wrong should be able to be tested and analysed, and that's where the lawsuits come on. The first point of going to court and having a lawsuit is to get the evidence tested. If it's no good, then that's the end of the matter. Nothing to see here. And the Trump campaign, however, insists that it has good evidence for some of these problems. They say cases will be filed in most swing states. It'll probably become a big federal case, but they're most advanced in Pennsylvania and in Michigan. And the cases revolve around two main issues, and they are both related to the mail-in ballots. The first issue is the scrutiny of the ballots. The second issue is when the ballots were received. Regarding the scrutiny of ballots, it's alleged that in key Democrat stronghold voting centres, Republican poll watchers or scrutineers were locked out of the building or forced to stand many feet away from the counting. In Pennsylvania, for example, about 60 sworn affidavits, hundreds of pages, have been supplied by whistleblowers and poll watchers, with more on the way, to allegedly confirm that some 633,000 votes in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia were not allowed to be scrutinised by Republican poll watchers. That's an extraordinary claim, by the way. The watching process is where, the counter is counting and you have scrutineers, people watching on from each party. And they're allowed to contest ballots. If the counter goes to put a ballot on a pile, but it's improperly filled out or there's some error with it, one of the watchers is going to go, I contest that ballot. And they go, okay, that's on the contested pile, and they carry on. And then the contested pile is scrutinised later on. I've done poll watching here in Australia. You're supposed to be able to stand so that you can read the ballots. That way you can actually contest them properly. And it's a really important process. You do contest things that genuinely are out of order all the time. And for the Republicans not to have been allowed to do that, or to have been held back, it says, 15 to 100 feet from the process so they couldn't see anything, is insane. Is insane by any international or decent standard. In Michigan, there's also a case being compiled in relation to about 100,000 ballots that showed up at 4 o'clock in the morning, allegedly in a truck with an interstate number plate, were brought into the voting centre. There were some irregularities about the way they were packaged, etc. And this was after the poll watchers had been sent home and most of them had left, but a couple of them saw this happen and went back in. And it's alleged that the ballots were exclusively for Joe Biden and were not able to be checked, scrutinised by the Republican poll watchers. And the campaign says that thousands of whistleblowers have come forward. They're sorting through all of this, including apparently disgusted Democrat officials, and there's more cases on the way as they work through all of those reports. They say that these issues are confined to a few Democrat stronghold cities only, like Detroit, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and outside of a few others, really nowhere else. Those are the allegations. If there's any truth in those allegations, who cares who's going to win? They need to be checked because the integrity of the system's at stake. And it may well be that there's nothing to it. I actually doubt that, having looked into this and heard some of the press conferences from some of those whistleblowers and so forth. I think there's something in this, I really do, which is sad, but there you go. The second point, I said the first one was about the scrutinising of the ballots. The second one is regarding the timing of the ballots. And so this is basically the Trump campaign filing lawsuits to ensure that ballots that are late are not accepted. They had some success in Pennsylvania, where the Supreme Court of the US made an order that any ballots received after 8 p.m. on the election day had to be segregated and kept separately. That means that they've opened up the possibility of a remedy of having those ballots excluded or sorted in a different way. I think the issue really is around ballots that have arrived late and were posted late. So it's all right if a ballot arrives after Election Day and it was posted before Election Day, but it's the issue of those postmarks, and so they're just trying to enforce that. So the question is, what does this amount to? A bunch of lawsuits that are based around saying, hey, we need to be able to scrutinise because it's the law, and we need to be able to have late ballots excluded because that's the law. To my mind, that really amounts to wanting the law to be followed. There's no more funny business, there's no more trickery, there's no more smoke and mirrors than that. It's just a question of following the law and basic integrity. And yet the behaviour of the Democrats in response has been extremely aggressive. They even appealed a decision to let Republican poll watchers stand a few feet closer to the counting process. I think it was 6 feet closer, where they still couldn't see. But they appealed that decision. And I'm sitting there going, this is crazy. It's just crazy. Why would you do that? By any fair international standard, as I said, it's madness. The real reason I suspect they're fighting is because, you can imagine a worst case scenario, and I think this is a really long shot, so let's, but you can imagine a worst case scenario where, it finally gets to the Supreme Court, and what they say is, yep, we agree with all this evidence, clearly 633,000 ballots did not get scrutinised, they're excluded. Or, yep, we've seen all this evidence. Clearly something dodgy happened with 100,000 ballots in Michigan at 4 o'clock in the morning. They're all dodgy. We're going to exclude them. Now, that would be there's all sorts of other possibilities and remedies that can come. But let's say the worst case scenario is upon the Democrats and that happens. Frankly, they should have thought about that before excluding the Republican poll watchers, if that's true. But if that happens, well, they lose the election. Because Michigan plus Pennsylvania, I think might even give Trump, Biden 269 each. in terms of delegates, and then it goes to the Congress. And I think the process for that is that the states actually vote as delegations, and Trump has more states than Biden, so I think Trump would win. So it's all messy. If that was to happen, let's see. I mean, we haven't even verified the evidence yet, but personally, I'm really curious. And I want to be clear, I'm really curious about this, not primarily because of who won. I don't mind if my guy lost. I don't even live in America, I do mind. But I mean, it's not something that's the end of the world. Like, you can cope with a loss. You lose things all the time. That's not really the bigger issue. And I'm not sure that this will change the outcome of the election, whatever happens. I think it won't. And so the issue for me is that it's important for the world, let alone just America, that American elections are free, fair, and transparent. It is so important. And it's a matter of integrity, to shine the light in, to check that all is well. And if it is, fantastic. We're all confirmed in our happiness that all is well. And look, the Republicans have to put up a better campaign next time. But if all is not well, it's important for America and the world that it is fixed, and that there is a big rap on the knuckles for the arrogant flouting of the law by poll watchers who are simply taking their Democrat majorities too far. Now, if it doesn't resolve, as I said, it'll fester in society like cancer. It will. I fear that's already happening because there is such division in America, but certainly it shouldn't be made worse. And this business of dismissing and arrogantly just walking over the top of people and saying baseless, unsubstantiated, rubbish. Why doesn't the media show some curiosity, for heaven's sake, and actually go and interview some of these people who signed these affidavits? Why don't they go and find out the information? Of course, they're not interested, which is the real shame of all of this, frankly. Something else, and some of you will be feeling this at this point if you haven't switched it off already if you're in this category, but there are people who simply won't accept that such things are even a possibility. We live in the Western democracies and we trust our institutions and this just doesn't happen and it's all conspiratorial. Well, I suspect actually that people who say that are people who think that we still live in a world of rational discussion and mutual respect. The newsflash is that those days are actually over. There are ideological changes. Now, I don't think that's a good thing, by the way, and I'm not saying we should get along with the program. We shouldn't. We should be different. But ideological changes are taking place which are ushering in a deeply embedded view that the only way is power at any cost. And that's what happens with a godless Marxist kind of undertone in our education system. The highest thing is power. Everything's about power. It's all about oppression. It's all about victimization. It's all about power. It's all about supremacy. That's all that exists. Power at any cost. Even the things I talked about, so rationality, for example, they say the belief of some of these postmodernists and so on is that actually your rationality is just a device to drag me in to engage on your terms and exert power over me. Your systems and institutions, they're not supreme, they're only useful to the extent that they grant power and that they work for us, and so we can change them and we can use them to our own ends. Or that truth doesn't even matter, or that truth isn't real, it's just power. And so when I have power, I'll make my own truth. And that's quite seriously where we are. And there are elements, I don't want to just pan everyone who votes Democrat, but there are elements of the left side of politics emerging in America quite strongly, more strongly than they used to by a long way as this sort of ideology gets stronger, where they demonstrate that power at any cost impulse. I mean, the difference between what we're talking about now and the Russia scandal, if we all remember, Russia was the reason that Trump won the election, is that there wasn't one jolly atom of evidence for what they were saying. There's a lot of evidence for this that demands a second look, by the media I would hope, but they're not, so the courts. Also, you can look at the impeachment trial of President Trump. There was nothing to that but politics, to actually try and impeach a sitting president. It's a disgrace. What for? In both cases, it's all politics and power. Or you look at the nomination or the confirmation hearings of Supreme Court justices, particularly Brett Kavanaugh, and remember how that the lies and the filthy, unconscionable and disgusting tarnishing of his character to make him out to be some kind of gang rapist who was responsible for the most unspeakable of crimes, to ruin him and ruin his family with no conscience. Why? Power. Or indeed, you can look at the way that social media, Silicon Valley, censor the Trump campaign 65 times in the lead up to the election. The Biden campaign, not even once. And you look into the reasons for the censorship and the instances and what's it all about. It's about political disagreement, frankly. What for? For power. Why did they kick the New York Post off of Twitter for releasing the Hunter Biden laptop scandal story and then assiduously censor that on Facebook and Twitter and all the rest of it and keep it suppressed? Power. Why did they, when doctors came out in America talking about advancements in coronavirus treatments and the fact that the cause for alarm and fear was not what it used to be, why did they censor it and delete it and take it offline? Power, because of course the coronavirus chaos was part of the narrative against Trump and it ultimately brought him unstuck. I actually think no coronavirus, you still have Trump for a second term. There's riots, looting, burning of churches, anarchy in American cities, bringing American cities to their knees in recent months. Why? Well, because they're there to make Trump look divisive, fan that narrative. What for? For power. The point I'm trying to make is this. Evil is done, wrongs are committed, because it is justified for the sake of obtaining power from people who they hate. That is a very real strand of society in America right now, and it's coming from the left side. It really is. There's a radical strand. There's plenty on the left side not like that at all, and that's great. But there's a radical strand. Do you really think that they wouldn't have a little tamper with a vote to stop a man who they believe is literally Hitler, some of these types? Of course they would. Those of us who are engaged with politics and understand know that of course they would. Of course, they think he's literally Hitler. They've done all the. I mean, forgive me for thinking that someone who sets fire to a church wouldn't mess with 10,000 ballots. Of course they would. Of course they would. And just in case you think the rhetoric about literally Hitler is overstated, it's not. Listen to some of the tweets that have come out from leading Democrat personalities since Election Day. Listen to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat Senator for New York. Is anyone archiving these Trump sycophants for when they try to downplay or deny their complicity in the future? I foresee decent probability of many deleted tweets, writings, and photos in the future. Archiving their stuff? Their photos? Their tweets? Their writings? Well, thank you, George Orwell. Or indeed, Harry Sevugan, I think that's probably not how you pronounce it, Sevuan or whatever, a senior Obama spokesperson and national press secretary for the Democratic National Committee. He says White House staff are starting to look for jobs. Employers considering them should remember that there are consequences for hiring anyone who helped Trump attack American values. You better believe it. We just launched the Trump Accountability Project to make sure anyone who took a paycheck to help Trump undermine America is held responsible for what they did. Or you listen to Robert Reich, former Secretary of Labor and a longtime Democrat apparatchik. He says, when this nightmare is over, we need a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I mean, straight out of Soviet Russia. It would erase Trump's lies, comfort those who have been harmed by his hatefulness, and name every official, politician, executive, and media mogul whose greed and cowardice enabled this catastrophe. Or Jennifer Rubin, a well-known journalist. It's not only that Donald Trump has to lose, his enablers have to lose. We have to collectively burn down the Republican Party. We have to level them, because if there are survivors, they will do it again. I could go on. I mean, I say it again, would they really do this, some of these people, if they had the chance? Of course they would. Of course they would. They've shown that through their conduct, and that level of hatred, that level of, it's serious. So society is changing for the worse in that regard. Power at all costs, hatred of the other, suppression of those who threaten your power. It's very sad. It's very serious. We should be different, for sure. And that's why I say in this whole Trump thing, I think we can maintain interest in it. We can maintain curiosity and we can maintain pressure on it so long as we're doing it for the sake of transparency. So long as we're doing it not just because, if you're a Trump supporter, not just because your guy lost. And if he did, well, that's wrongly and that's unjust, then it will be put right. But if he did rightly and that is just, then it will be put right. Great. As long as that's the motivation for transparency and truth and shining the light in. And that's why I'm actually very curious about it. I guess you can't divorce from your mind the fact that the election result could, in some remarkable set of circumstances over the next few weeks, which is very unlikely, actually change based on proving of some of these cases. Look, if that was the right thing, then good. But if it's not the right thing, then fine. It just means that that the Trump campaign or the Republicans live to fight another day, and we put up with the Biden-Harris thing. And you can see I'm obviously more supportive of the Trump side, but it's important that we're in this for the right reasons. But also, you'll note that they see the Trump campaign lawsuit as a grab for power and nothing more. And they will oppose it. They will say it doesn't matter. They will say that it's baseless, it's got no evidence. They'll say all these things that are untrue. The media won't touch it, they won't cover it for as long as they possibly can. Why? Well, because it threatens power. And also, they will try and take vengeance on those who instigated it, as we just read from leading Democratic people. It's really a shame. It's not a world of truth anymore. Or no, maybe it's better for me. It is a world of truth because it's God's world. It's not a culture of truth anymore. It is a culture of power. That's one of the biggest changes to take place in the West at the moment. It's a change we should fight with all we have. Next up, I want to give you a little bit of encouragement. And I ended that last segment on a bit of a dour note. But here's the thing. Here's the thing. In the face of all the chaos and all the changes that are taking place around us right now, in the face of some significant changes in Australia and around the world, in America, I think that a lot of us can get dispirited, a lot of us can get downcast, a lot of us can lose our focus. Here are some scriptures that have helped me. I want to make a couple comments. Firstly, Proverbs chapter 16, verse 9. In their hearts, humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. Secondly, Daniel chapter 2. May the name of God be blessed forever and ever. For wisdom and power belong to him. It is he who changes the times and the periods. He removes kings and appoints kings. He gives wisdom to wise men and knowledge to people of understanding. It is he who reveals the profound and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells in him. Psalm chapter 2, some selected verses. Why are the nations restless and the peoples plotting in vain? The kings of the earth take their stand and the rulers conspire together. He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord scoffs at them. As for me, I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill. Do you know something? I am so glad that political power is not the highest and greatest thing in the world. Doesn't mean it's irrelevant, doesn't mean it's unimportant, but it certainly isn't all there is. And I do feel for those who believe that their destiny, their happiness, depends on having their man in the White House. That's why they riot. That's why they get their anguished faces made into internet memes, because for them, there is no higher authority. There is no final source of security and peace and happiness except the systems that exist on this earth. They can't escape from that paradigm. But politics is not all there is. The systems of mortal men are not all there is. Destiny, sovereignty, meaning, they're all found in something far greater, something far more reliable. And I just say at times like this, I am so glad I know the living God. I'm so glad I'm at peace that wisdom and power belongs to him. It is he who changes times and periods. He also sets the nation's time and place as well, it says in Acts chapter 17. It is he who removes kings and appoints kings. It is he who gives wisdom to people of understanding. He knows what's in the darkness. He already knows about all that stuff. And I love the image here of him laughing at the conspiring of the nations and the people going their own way. And he says, I'm in charge. My king is on Zion, my holy hill. That's a reference to Jesus, the ascended Christ. This is also encouraging. And Psalm 2 finishes with, now then, you kings, use insight. Let yourselves be instructed, you judges of the earth. Serve the Lord with reverence and rejoice with trembling. How blessed are all who take refuge in him. Amen. And you know, let's not lose our focus. Let's not put our hope and trust in a civilization, in a political system. That's never meant to be. There is something far greater than a political system. There's something far greater than a Morrison or a Trump or a whoever or a political system anywhere in the world. And it's this. I know the living God. And you know, I know many watch this program who don't. And so I trust that you do too. And maybe at a time like this, you can see more clearly just how important it is to see that absolute reality. finally, I'm going to talk, if I can find through my notes here, I'm going to talk about Donald Trump. There is a real tendency at the moment for people to dismiss him and walk away from him as if he was a little bit of a disaster. I am not going to do that. I'm actually going to affirm his legacy for a second. And look, there is a universe in which Trump is still president, but I'm just going to go with the flow at the moment and say, look, let's treat Trump as a one-term president who's got a legacy. I want to talk about his legacy for a second, and I want to explain why it is that I ended up becoming a bit of a Trump fan. Not to say that he's perfect, but I ended up becoming fundamentally a bit of a Trump fan. I want to answer that question because a lot of people don't understand it, and I figured this out when we sent an email out the other day with a bit of Trump favorability to Trump, and people got a little bit upset. I want to explain what it is that got me on board and what it is that caused Trump to attract 7 million extra votes in 2020 over 2016. Why did he get so many others on board behind him? Obviously, he polarized a lot of people too, but why is it that there was such a groundswell of support for Trump in 2016 and 2020? And why is it that so many people support him, especially from within the church? Well, I think it comes down to a few things. I think that people struggle to understand this, firstly, because we emphasize appearance over substance. Secondly, because there is a concern about Trump's character. That one I think is valid. And finally, because there is simply a misunderstanding of Trump's record and what he has actually achieved. Do you know, in relation to his record, the substance of what he's done? 3 general points. Firstly, none of the grave moral failures of his life, which I'll get to in a minute, have characterized his time in office. In fact, he has changed significantly for the better in those respects whilst in office. Second, his administration is chock-a-block with very serious Christians. One only needs to look to Mike Pence or Kayleigh McEnany, the press secretary, or Ben Carson and many others. These are no ordinary Christians. These are real deal guys, real deal people. They have serious influence over him and his administration. And third, I always saw that Trump had the raw guts and bravery to smash through institutional, diplomatic and political barriers like nobody else, and that nobody else would dare to confront. As a genuine outsider, he belonged to nobody. He owed nobody anything. He didn't depend on their approval. He didn't crave their advancement. He didn't crave their affirmation. Institutional politicians would never have done the things that he's done. They would never have put that pressure on China. They never would have told the UN what hypocrites they were. They never would have stood firm for pro-life matters and even attended the March for Life. They never would have been an unapologetic defender of religious freedom. Too controversial, too many relationships to maintain, too hard. Always thinking of political considerations and who they belong to and who they want to please. They wouldn't have championed faith. They wouldn't have named the media's corruption for what it is. Nobody else had that courage. And there is frankly an extraordinary list of specific achievements from his one term in office. I could take an entire segment to cover them all, but you can take, for example, the massive realignment of America's global interests, particularly America's trade, but also deals that obligated America to different things that affected their economic performance and their obligations to the world. He changed that unbelievably in America's interests. He renegotiated and cancelled international agreements which others wouldn't touch, like the Paris Agreement. He exited the World Health Organization, the Iran deal, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, bunch of others. He had the biggest overhaul in the nation's tax code in 3 decades, reducing corporate taxes from 35% to 21%. The results of all of that were huge. Firstly, the US actually reached energy independence in 2019. Now, people say, oh, fact check, false. No, what I mean is that they became a net exporter of oil products and also an exporter of natural gas as well, which is what, a net exporter of oil products is one definition of energy independence. What that meant, and that's a huge surge for all the oil states and the industry and so on, and the manufacturing sector went hugely upwards, but in effect, 7 million came off food stamps, 10 million came off welfare. The net worth of the bottom half of wage earners increased by 47%, which is 3 times more than the top half. Low-income workers saw a 16% pay increase. Stock markets were up 70%. Minority unemployment at the lowest level was at the lowest levels ever recorded, that is blacks, Hispanics and Asians. And the lowest unemployment in half a century was recorded at just 3.5%, which is incredible. Now, this is all immediately pre-coronavirus, and it was roaring back to these levels very quickly, actually, in the last few months of the presidency. He also was criticised as going to be a threat to world peace and a warmonger on the world stage. Well, you know what? He pulled off peace deals that previous administrations could not even have dreamed of. He brokered peace deals with Israel and Bahrain, Israel and the United Arab Emirates, Israel and Sudan. You know, he brokered these things. And notice that he started no new wars, and throughout the entirety of his presidency, he was bringing troops home continually. Or what about religious freedom? He signed executive orders and made significant steps towards protecting prayer in schools, towards religious freedom on campus, made executive orders and reforms throughout government agencies and made them put in policies to protect conscience and all the rest of it. The same in relation to life. He put all sorts of policies in place to protect the conscience rights of workers through their health insurance and this kind of thing. He was the most pro-life president in America's history, modern history as far as we can tell. He had a March for Life appearance, the first president ever. Title X funding was cut through him so that it wouldn't go to abortion providers through the welfare system. He massively curtailed DHHS funding of abortion, leading to tens of millions in cuts to Planned Parenthood funding. He halted research using fetal tissue from elective abortions through the DHHS. He had flagged in his State of the Union address legislation to ban late-term abortions in America. Now, that may never happen because it looks like he's going to be a one-termer. Now, he also, to defend religious liberty and life and various other things, most of these policies actually come from the courts. He appointed three really strong judges to the Supreme Court of America. Now, that's a generation of legacy right there. He also appointed 53 to the US Circuit Court and 220 federal judges overall, with a combined service of over 2,000 years in them going forward. That is an incredible change to the US court system. I could take several segments describing the full list of extraordinary achievements of the Trump administration. Now, I am not downplaying his faults. I really am not. There are people who have concerns about his faults. But I think that the concerns about his faults can be overblown. They really can be. I think we need a bit of perspective. There are those, for example, who fall into this trap of emphasizing appearances over substance. Now, they both matter. I get that. But, you know, there is a reality, actually, that, somebody can be a hypocrite. Somebody can be all appearance and no substance. It's what John the Baptist would call a whitewashed tomb. Nice on the outside, but full of dead men's bones. And people have become very skeptical of that carefully crafted image that politicians and leaders have, and they've become skeptical for a very good reason. They're tired of their lies, they're tired of their rehearsed lines that have no substance, they're tired of their marketing efforts that hide the truth about them and what they want to do. And by contrast, there is something completely authentic about Trump. He is what he says he is. He does what he says he will do. And he means what he says, and he changes for nobody because he is who he is. And to many, that is actually part of his real attractiveness. And that actually fosters a base level of trust from a lot of people. The guy is who they think he is, and he will fight for them because he said he would. Even if he says, I'm going to build a wall, he goes ahead and he starts building a wall. He does it, gets it done. And I think that Trump possibly hasn't been recognised for one of the bigger virtues in this respect, which is that he's fundamentally honest. That's not to say he doesn't ever do anything that's politically motivated. Of course he does. But everyone bangs on about what a liar he is, and I don't believe that he is. I think he's straight up and down, and very little is hidden in Trump. He is what he is. His bombastic nature is probably the price that you pay for somebody with staying power. The thick skin, the sheer force of will to break through on issues that would send members of the political establishment running for the hills. If you need a rhinoceros to walk through some concrete walls, it's not surprising if he's a little bit unnuanced, a little bit hard to handle from time to time. It may be the price that was paid for some of his better qualities. Because he truly endured more, I think, than any elected leader in a Western country by far. Big tech, media, the political establishment, the international political establishment, they threw the kitchen sink at him, and he kept on going. And I respect that. I really do. I notice there is a big emphasis on the surface sometimes and not on the substance. And the reason I put through the achievements, and I talked about who he's surrounded himself with, and I talked about the moral character of the man today, particularly in terms of his past playboy lifestyle, having been not characterizing the office of presidency, I did all of that on purpose because there's substantive issues here that are a real credit to him, really a big credit to him, that show real competence, that show real ability and desire to do all the right things. And I appreciated that about Donald Trump. And I worry in Christian circles in particular how that there's a real shift sometimes to the surface rather than the substance. appearance rather than reality, tone rather than truth. Now, I was talking to some people at a theological college recently, and the conversation got to evangelism. And the first thing they went to was, what sort of tone you should adopt. I think tone will take care of itself if your motive is right. People can spot a faker, but they can also spot someone who is genuine. Remember the commendation that Jesus gave to Nathanael when he met him. He said, "Behold, an Israelite in whom there is no guile." In other words, he had no artifice. He didn't have a fake constructed image around him. There was nothing deceptive about him. He wasn't a hypocrite. And there is an old saying that the devil is a gentleman. And I think that that contains some sage wisdom, because he can be. Now, you say, "Martyn, you're just minimizing all the bad points about him." Look, maybe I am. I trust I'm not. But I do think that there are concerns about Trump's character which are perfectly legitimate. When you query for substance of that claim, it comes down to a few things. And I will acknowledge these because they are important to acknowledge, and I would prefer that they didn't exist in a president. And maybe the next Republican president, or indeed the next Democrat president after Joe Biden, is somebody who has a whole slew of positive things about them, which include no issues on this front. And that would be fantastic. But he has lived something of a playboy lifestyle. He had been married 3 times. He had boasted of his affairs. All true. He is a man whose bombastic and caustic nature crossed over into the realm of insults and crossed over into the realm of boastfulness. All true. A very imperfect man, especially to be the president. But for Christians, and this is to justify why Christians would have voted for him anyway, they were confronted with a choice. It was Trump or Hillary. It was Trump or Biden. That's where they were. They had to make a choice. And wisdom is the ability to look at 2 completely imperfect candidates. And yes, not going without acknowledging all the bad points about either of them, or the good points, and say, which one? Which one? And the record here is, I think, what brought a lot of people on board. The authenticity here is what brought a lot of people on board. And yeah, a lot of people held their nose in 2016. A few less people, I think, held their nose in 2020, although more people opposed him because they were tired of some of the they were probably exhausted, I think, by his presidency. They had to make that choice. And I would love a president that had a lifelong record of moral purity, statesman-like character, and the nous to get stuff done and the will to push it through. I'd like all of those things in a perfect human. And wouldn't it be great if such a person came up at some stage in the future? But I wanted to, I think, make the point that Trump has actually left a tremendous legacy, particularly in the court system, particularly in the reshaping of America's international politics, and particularly in the area of the economy and the growth of certain industries. Now, who knows what the future of that is if Biden wins the presidency and if the Senate is controlled by the Republicans? I don't know. Maybe it's probably all going to stay more or less as it is because there'll be checks and balances between the 2 parties and the Republicans won't let too much undoing of the legacy take place. I don't know. But I think Trump will go down in history as a reforming president and a president that really changed a lot of things. And as for the future, let's wait and see what happens. But that's the reason why I ultimately became a fan, and I'm quite happy to admit it, even if he ends up losing this election. I'm Martyn, and that was the truth of it. Hey, thank you so much for watching. If you liked what you saw, then make sure to hit the like button. If you want to never miss another video again, make sure to subscribe, or you can right now watch more videos right here. Cheers.